Horace was the star of a series of games published by a company called Scion for numerous computers in the 1980s, most notably the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. The Horace character himself is I don't really know, but he could sort of be considered a sort of mascot for the ZX Spectrum, being one of video games' first mascots to follow in the wake of Pac-Man and Mario. From 1982 to 1983, the character starred in 3 games: Hungry Horace, Horace Goes Skiing, and Horace and the Spiders, all of which were clones of other popular games at the time. I don't think I need to tell you what those games were, as you can just tell from the footage. In 1985, a 4th game in the series was planned to be released called Horace to the Rescue, but this game would never officially see the light of day, as during its development, the series creator and developer William Tang suffered a collapsed lung and seemingly disappeared from the face of the planet. The last game he was known to work on was Asterix and the Magic Cauldron, which released in 1986. Not much is known about Tang other than his work on computer games, and a book he edited in 1982 called Spectrum Machine Language for the Absolute Beginner, which I think you can figure out what that's about. A 4th Horace game did eventually come out in 1995 called Horace and the Mystic Woods, and was only released for the Scion Series 3 Personal Assistant, but Tang had no involvement with it. Horace has seen a bit of a legacy though, as he also cameoed in a Spectrum Inspector Gadget game released in 1987 and is seemingly referenced in the 2003 PS2 game Dog's Life. He also has a cult following, probably because of his strange and kind of horrifying design. When I first found out about Horace as a kid, he kinda creeped me out, but I've grown to like the little guy. Not his games though, I've still never bothered to play those, and admittedly have no interest in doing so, though I'm not opposed to trying them out one day. I just didn't want to go to the trouble of emulating these games for this video. So all of this gameplay footage comes from Guru Larry's videos on the Blue Bum, which I'll link to in the description. So with this cult following behind the character in his games, it's a shame that next to nothing is known about its creator, and this person may potentially not even be with us anymore, given how his output seemingly ceased after suffering a collapsed lung. Most of the information about the man is his work, and the claims, seemingly coming from reliable sources, of him suffering a collapsed lung are the only personal details known about him. But even if Tang is no longer with us, at least he has lived on through the legacy of Horace. That's quite the legacy. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a game developed by Advanced Communication Company and released by Toho, yes, that Toho, in 1988 for the Famicom in Japan, and released by Bandai in 1989 for the NES in North America. If you know anything about this game, then you would know that it is infamously considered one of the worst video games ever created. So much so that it kinda loops around to being ironically enjoyable. Just about every single design choice this game makes are the exact wrong ones. But despite its infamy, the game has a few mysteries attached to it. The first one I want to get out of the way, as there is an answer to it, is the comparison between this game's title theme and another song from the game Rygar, published by Tecmo and released a year earlier. Take a listen. Now, some people have accused Advanced Communication, or Toho, or Bandai of ripping off Tecmo, but the answer is that both games simply have the same composer. Michiharu Hasuya. I will say, one of the few unironically good things about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is its music. Another great thing about the game is its box art. Even looking at the cover for the Japanese version, Jekyll Hakashi no Homagatoki, it's a very ominous cover with an ominous shot of Dr. Jekyll's lab with this ominous looking logo. It just pulls you in and tricks you into thinking you're about to play a totally epic game. If I was a Japanese kid in 1988, I'd really want to play this game based off of the cover. Meanwhile, the US box art features a picture of a man, presumably representing Dr. Jekyll transforming into Mr. Hyde, staring hypnotically at the viewer. Once again, this cover is tantalizing, and if I was an American kid in 1989, I'd really want to play this game based off of this cover. And these covers worked, and are the reason that through the sea of bad NES and Famicom games, that this one is still one of the most infamous. However, I primarily want to focus on that US cover. It's unknown who the model on this cover is. While it's been questioned for years, no real serious search efforts have been made to find this person. It makes sense as there's barely any information out there on the people who worked behind the scenes at Bandai of America or their marketing department in the 80s and 90s. I would know, as out of my interest in solving another video game mystery, that being the mystery of the game Yeah Yeah Beavis, which I previously covered in this video if you would like to know more. I actually tried to find any people I could contact that worked at Bandai of America, so I could find out whether or not they plan to release the game that is rumored to be Yeah Yeah Beavis for the NES, but I came up empty-handed. People who weren't executives or didn't work directly on games back in the day are often ignored, as given the nature of the industry at the time, they weren't credited as often like you see in most games credits these days. But while not having these Bandai connections cuts off potential sources of information for this person's identity, there's still a chance we may find out one day. But back to the Japanese cover, while this photograph doesn't depict anyone dressing up as a character, it does raise more questions about this game's development and why it was made. Now, the reason this game is of such poor quality isn't a mystery. The game's developer, Advanced Communication, is known for putting out other similar, albeit less well-known, electronic torture devices, but I've always wondered since finding out that the game was originally published by Toho in Japan, if it was originally supposed to tie into a movie potentially being produced by Toho's film division at that time that may have been cancelled, and the company commissioned the developers to make the game. Or if it was just a game that they were already working on that Toho was just willing to publish. If the former is true, it could be likely that this may be our only behind-the-scenes photo of a potential set for this film. But we may never find the answers to these mysteries. The real mystery is finding out what was up with puppy dogs in France in 1951. The Mega Man series took its sweet time transitioning to the 16-bit era. It took 3 years after the launch of the Super Famicom for Capcom to decide to bring the franchise over with Mega Man X in 1993, which was developed simultaneously with the last 8-bit Mega Man game, Mega Man 6, which had released a month earlier. Capcom wasn't planning on giving the franchise a break either, as a sequel, Mega Man X2, was released the following year. However, Capcom didn't want to abandon the original version of the Blue Bomber, and thus production began on Mega Man 7, immediately after production was finished on Mega Man X2, and a release date was set for March of 1995 that they couldn't move for some reason. Reminder that X2 was released in December of 1994. According to the book Mega Man Official Complete Works, the game had to be completed and shipped in less than 3 months, though the game seemed to have started actual production in November. Because of this, according to Mega Man 7 programmer Kazuhiro Tsuchiya, they had to enlist the help of an external development studio to meet this deadline. It's unknown what this team was, but it's rumored by fans to be a company called Minakuchi Engineering. The reason it's rumored to be them is that they were heavily affiliated with Capcom at the time, and most work on the Mega Man series done outside of Capcom's internal teams was done by them, as they had worked on all of the Game Boy Mega Man games except the second one, and had developed Mega Man The Wily Wars. They had also worked on other Capcom games during this time. This makes a lot of sense, but the theory is quite literally only being held together by this connection, as it's never been confirmed and there's nothing to actually prove this. There are also no names in the game's credits that stick out as being Minakuchi's staff, though in the special thanks the names Helper F and Helper M are listed. It's likely that these two could have been employees of Minakuchi Engineering that worked on the game. Speaking of Minakuchi Engineering, they're a pretty mysterious developer themselves, despite working with some very high-profile companies on some very high-profile releases. As far as I know, they only ever worked with 5 publishers: Capcom, as I mentioned, Microcabin, Video System, Hummingbird Soft on one game, and believe it or not, Nintendo. They made around 40 games for the arcade, FM7, PC-88, PC-98, MSX2, PC Engine, Mega Drive, and most notably the Super Nintendo and Game Boy. They were founded in 1984, but their first game seems to have came out in 1986. A game called Galpo Club for the FM7, PC-88, and PC-98. It appears to be a game with some naughty elements published by Microcabin, so I have no clue how they formed a relationship with Nintendo. Their work with Nintendo on Solar Striker and the port of Kicks on the Game Boy resulted in some of the best games on the system, so they weren't a slouch. It seems the last game they worked on was the Super Nintendo version of Mega Man X3, which released in 1995, a few months after the release of Mega Man 7. Their work on Mega Man 7, if they did any, may have actually been used as a testing grounds by Capcom for them to prove their capability to work on a major Mega Man release themselves, as Mega Man X3 was handled entirely by Minakuchi Engineering, with only the lambuxuacious elements of the game like the scenario and art being handled by Capcom internal. The reason they had outsourced the game was because by the time it was being made, they had shifted their console division's primary focus onto the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. They are also rumored to have began work on 2 different ports of Street Fighter II that were rejected by Capcom. A leaked prototype for the Mega Drive that's different from the final Mega Drive Street Fighter II games, just like Mega Man 7, is rumored, though not confirmed, to have been done by them, as it's known to have been created by an outsourced developer. Also, from digging into the files of Rockman World 4, people found a mock-up screen for a potential port of Street Fighter II to the Game Boy that they may have pitched to Capcom, but was rejected, and the version that did release for the Game Boy 2 years later wasn't done by them. It's kind of a shame how we never got to see them make something fully on their own, as they seemingly disappeared after 1995. Now, a lot of contract developers like these disappear without a trace. This is because these contract developers usually didn't receive credits for these games. But in the case of Minakuchi, they were at the very least potentially still around in 2002, which was when their website shut down. Unfortunately, while this website is archived, it's currently unreadable, so even for people who can read Japanese, we're not going to get any insight into what happened to the company. It's still unknown what became of them, unfortunately. Anyways, shifting focus back to Mega Man 7, I have 2 more shorter mysteries connected to the game. One is admittedly kinda silly though, so I'm gonna get it out of the way first. Springman's stage in this game bears a striking resemblance to the special stages in the 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog. However, I'm not really going to accuse Mega Man 7 of ripping off that game in particular, as I don't think that's the case. Rather, these designs seem to be a reference to something that I'm not getting. They obviously look like carnivals or theme parks, but The similar details here are so specific. Both have springs labeled by green and purple surrounding the player with pink walls and stars in the background. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it's likely that the designers of both of these environments grew up in 1970s Japan, and these are likely based off of some kind of popular amusement from them. Since Mega Man 7, being a late Super Nintendo game after all, had multiple different artists, I can't really pinpoint who specifically was responsible for this design. But I do know who did the design for the Sonic Special stages, Ayano Koshiro, sister of composer Yuzo Koshiro. This game was actually the first project by her and her brother's studio, Ancient. I really wish they had done more Sonic games to see what directions they would have went, but I guess they were too busy. Anyways, she actually has a connection to Mega Man, though not one that explains this mystery. She's married to Hitoshi Ariga, who's best known for being an artist for the Pokemon Company, but is also notable for his various Mega Man or Rockman manga. They both seemingly met while working on another game by Ancient for Sega that her brother did music for and she did graphics for alongside him, that being Streets of Rage 2. Okay, I got a little off track there. I just find these people and their contributions to video games interesting. Back to my point about the similarities between these stage designs, I still haven't been able to figure out what they could have possibly have been based on, and would love to know. Finally, my last mystery involving Mega Man 7 ties back into Mega Man X. Mega Man X infamously has a lost prototype build that screenshots of were featured in magazines, depicting a very different version of the opening stage, and I covered this a little more in depth in an earlier video. Something I neglected to mention in that video, however, was that this version of the opening stage bears a striking resemblance to Mega Man 7's opening stage, to the point that fans have speculated that graphics were actually reused from this prototype in this stage's graphics. It would make a lot of sense given how rushed the development of Mega Man 7 was, that they'd want to reuse assets whenever they could, especially considering they had a lot of new ones to create, and the team probably didn't want the unused graphics to go to waste. However, it's pretty much impossible to tell just from the magazine screenshots, and the only way we'd ever be truly sure is if this prototype were to ever leak. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more like this, check out my previous video game mysteries video. I really hope you enjoyed this video, as these are my favorites to make, just pure fun. Thank you to my patron. If you would like to support me and get some exclusive videos, just go to patreon.com/thesunshinefeeler. I hope you all have a wonderful day.